On the day of the earthquake, the Ambulance Control Centre at Hamilton was knocked out of action. A mobile communications unit was used in its place. However, its range only extended to Charlestown. Ambulance stations at Booragul, Cooranbong, Doyleston and Belmont were without vital communications and were unaware they were needed in the city. To prevent such a communications breakdown occurring again, Belmont Station has installed a unique system to monitor ambulance radio and to act as a sub-control centre for Lake Macquarie should Hamilton be crippled. The device can also pick up marine radio, and emergency channels will be monitored 24 hours a day.
To support people like Crest and the Coastal Patrol and the Coast Guard, but the difference with ours is it's on a 24-hour monitoring system. We just see our role as a backup system only to these services, not to sort of take away anything that they're already doing.
The station will also listen to CB radio, but will only become involved if the emergency call goes unheard.
And any sort of calls that we get, we'll channel through Belmont Police if police response is necessary. If it's ambulance orientated, we'll phone through our ambulance control in town.
For the job it does, the equipment has come relatively cheap. The radio cost the station around $1,400, while most of the material used in the transmitter was donated.
And is it true that part of your aviary's on the roof?
Yes, it's true that part of my bird aviary's on the roof. Though tube makers did sort of donate most of the equipment, yes, a major part of the pipe installation on the roof was going to be my bird aviary.
The Premier was on a tight schedule with meetings planned in Sydney, but he still had time for congratulations for the new crop of Kincumber students. Inside the Assembly Hall, Mr Greiner praised the efficient workmanship in the school, finished by private enterprise 2 years ahead of contract. But according to new headmaster Gus Platter, most of the credit belongs with the Kincumber community. For more than a decade, parents have been fighting for a new school to ease overcrowding in nearby Terrigal and Erina.
There is tremendous community drive, excellent community organisation, and you can see what has been achieved by their efforts.
300 Year 7 and 8 students are enrolled for 1990. By 1994, 1,000 students up to Year 12 are planned. While parents admitted today's opening was a great step forward, they say more support is desperately needed. Areas such as this industrial arts building and library need to be equipped, and that could lead to another $500,000 in expenses. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
State law says the Pacific oyster is a noxious pest. As such, oyster growers are expected to eradicate the rogue mollusk if it grows on their leases. Producers are allowed 5 Pacific oysters per 100 sticks. Any more and they risk prosecution. Authorities fear that if left unchecked, the prolific Pacific oyster will sap estuaries of vital food supplies, spelling the end of the $40 million Sydney rock oyster industry. But a group of Port Stephens farmers say it's an uphill battle to wipe out the Pacific oyster.
That's Pacific, that's Pacific, that's Pacific. There's two Pacifics on top of one another there. That's a Pacific, that's a Pacific, that's a rock, and that's a rock, that's a rock, that's a rock. There's a dead Pacific, there's a almost full, that's ready for market, that Pacific there. I'd go so far as to say there wouldn't be one oyster farmer in this port that wouldn't have above the criteria on some of his leases. In other words, there isn't one oyster farmer in this port, as you said, that is operating inside the law. They're all illegal.
Rod Moffat is a member of the New South Wales Shellfish Association, a breakaway group of 21 Port Stephens oyster farmers that want a state government pardon for the outlawed Pacific oyster. Rather than destroying the species, they want to farm and sell it. Elsewhere, it wouldn't be a radical idea. In fact, the Pacific oyster accounts for 80% of the world's farmed oyster production.
The money that we're throwing away is their attitude is wrong, and they're listening to the wrong people.
The wrong people, according to Rod Moffat, are the members of the mainstream Oyster Farmers Association.
The threat is that it could virtually be the dying throes of the Sydney rock oyster industry.
Barry Phillips sees no legitimate place for the Pacific oyster in Port Stephens. He warns that if the noxious fish legislation is lifted, the port will be closed to oyster movement to and from other estuaries, a common production tool in the Sydney rock industry.
It just comes back to really these few self-interested people that's promoting it, and they are making life perhaps a little bit hard for a number of us that want to get on with the job of growing our Sydney rock oysters.
So great was the response that the venue had to be changed twice before all could be accommodated. Discussion quickly got down to what happened to buildings during the earthquake and what needs to be done to lessen the impact of any future tremors. It was agreed that reinforced concrete structures remained in the main relatively intact, the notable exception being the Workers' Club, but no one was willing to preempt any findings of the coronial inquiry. Interestingly, evidence was presented that among the region's old buildings, decay was already well advanced.
It was also happening already before the earthquake. There is evidence of buildings, even in Maitland for example, where the outer skin was gradually peeling off. We have some evidence that it was occurring in some buildings in Newcastle. I won't identify them, but it was definitely there. The tiles were corroding, there was problems in terms of forcing the mortar apart in the masonry, for example.
But what of the future? What changes can be made to make buildings more resilient? Architects and engineers agree that the energy in an earthquake has to be dissipated and masonry cracking will occur. The idea is to keep the building structurally sound.
I think in the overall sense, very little will change in my view. But what will change are details for masonry. And in fact, it'll be interesting to see what we do about the old buildings, whether we have to go back and actually adjust, put in more lateral support, for example.
Later speakers today included the Director of Health and Building with Newcastle Council, Harold Stewart, with papers tomorrow on the special requirements of heritage buildings. Mr Hawke called on the Governor-General at Yarralumla to advise him of the need for an election for the House of Representatives and half the Senate. At a news conference immediately afterwards at Parliament House, Mr Hawke told Australians he is seeking re-election for a fourth term for Labor.
This election that's going to be held on the 24th of March will resolve questions that are going to be of vital importance to everyone in this nation, as individuals, as families, and of course as an Australian nation as a whole. The essential question, I believe, is whether we will continue together forward towards the achievement of a fair society, an increasingly efficient and competitive Australian economy, and all that within a healthy environment for ourselves, and that we're going to be able to hand on to our children and to theirs.
Unemployed Fern Bay man Gary Jones was charged with murder by Mayfield detectives this morning. It's alleged Jones had been involved in a brawl with a colleague, 25-year-old Stockton man Gary Carter, on Tuesday. Carter later died at home. Jones was charged with assault yesterday, but this morning new charges were laid. It's alleged that Jones had struck Carter a number of times during the dispute shortly before midnight at Mitchell Street in Stockton. The court was told that Carter went home after the fight, had a meal and went to bed. His body was discovered shortly after midday the next day, still in bed, by his girlfriend. A subsequent post-mortem revealed he died of a massive brain hemorrhage. Counsel for Carter said the men had been friends and the death was an unfortunate and sad incident. Magistrate Col Elliott granted conditional bail. Jones will reappear at Newcastle Local Court on the 16th of next month.
The voice of Newcastle Rugby League and one of its personalities may well be switching to another code. For the last 2 months, Lee Morn has had more on his mind than football. Although never a member of a political party, Lee says he may stand as an independent for the seat of Newcastle.
We've had representatives over the years that have obviously been told to run away and sit in the corner. And the major parties do that with seats they have no regard for, and they've had no regard for Newcastle.
Morn says the loss of the frigate and submarine contracts should never have happened and that the safe Labor seat of Newcastle needs a scare. But while the former carpenter, Woolworths manager, real estate agent and television commentator has grand visions, he admits policies are still on the back burner. Morn will meet with the team behind George Keegan to fine-tune finances and campaign strategy. And then the final decision rests with his family. But like the football team he has helped to build, Lee says he's ready to fight.
Mate, if I don't think I could win it, I probably wouldn't go into it.
For the Red and Blues, it's a match they desperately want to win, as the money rewards in the pre-season cup are immense, and the bank vault at the Knights Castle is a little thin, according to their 1988-89 balance sheet. With a dreadful injury toll to their forwards, it also gives the Knights a chance to see the playing skills of new recruits, Adrian Brunker from Queensland and Marty Creaker from New Zealand. Captain Sam Stewart has recovered from a knee strain and will take his place on the field. The match between the Knights and the Gavin Miller-led Sharks will be telecast on NBN at 9:30 tonight. At the Raymond Terrace Pool, the 11th Port Stephens Water Polo Championships are being conducted this weekend. Sydney clubs Cronulla, Balmain and Parramatta have joined local clubs and teams from Tamworth and the Manning Valley at the championships, which is based on fun as much as serious competition. It's a chance for the Hunter teams to gain experience from their Sydney counterparts who are involved in much tougher leagues. Today a round robin was played and some super water polo was on display. A sport that's not for the faint-hearted and the relatively fit, water polo requires stamina and a good control of the ball, and it does help if you can swim a bit. While there was plenty of frenetic action in the Olympic pool at Raymond Terrace, its near neighbour Grahamstown Dam was a scene of tranquility, not the ideal conditions for a sailboard regatta. Today's race was due to start at 12 o'clock, but there wasn't a breath of wind in sight for the 30-odd competitors. Even the start boat needed a tow to get in position, and while it may have been a fabulous day to work on your tan, for others there was more of a chance for a paddle on your board than a stiff sail across the dam. It's hoped that the wind picks up tomorrow, where a strong field is expected to compete. At the Cliff Bar Beach, the long-awaited Earthquake Longboard Championship finally got underway after being postponed for the past few weeks. Unfortunately for the organisers, many of the big-name surfers had other commitments and couldn't surf, but Craig Johnston was one superstar to turn up to raise money for the appeal. The ex-Liverpool football star was quoted as being asked whether he was a natural footer or a goofy footer. His reply, "I haven't stood up long enough to find out." For others, it was a trip back in time and a chance to have some fun in the sun. Stu Entwistle from Sydney was the favourite to take out the title from a hot field of longboard exponents. One sport that didn't have to worry about the weather was the Newcastle Cup Grand Prix 10-pin bowling tournament at Mayfield Bowl. The strongest field ever has assembled to try and wrest the championship from Katara's Terry Ma and share in the $11,000 up for grabs in prize money and trophies. Bowlers from Victoria, Queensland and New South Wales are taking part in the titles, with many of Australia's top-line pin pummelers in action. The finals are on tomorrow. Only a chosen few could have visualised the finished product at Hawk's Nest, an 18-hole course that is set to become one of the best in the north. It all started way back in 1973-74, and for many years the 9-hole course was referred to as the Big Sand Bunker. 3 holes were added in the 80s, and in August of last year, the final 6 holes were added, with 11 new greens being designed by Newcastle's Mike Cooper, who is obviously proud of his work.
I think they're going to be rewarded because it will become, I think, a top-line course in the future.
To be officially opened tonight by the President of the New South Wales Golf Association, Lionel Clark, today's competition attracted a mixed field in the true meaning, along with dignitaries such as rugby league legend Reg Gasnier. And on a handicap of 19, he's more of a shark than a saint. For Lionel Clark, the completion of the course couldn't have been done without the help of the locals.
You must have the labour, you've got to have the dedication of the local members, and they're the people who've put all the work into it, and this is a classic example. The Hawks Nest members, they've been battling along here, and they've done a marvellous job.
Apart from the euphoria in the achievement and glowing praise for the help he and his committee have been given in completing the task, Club President Bob Russell challenges golfers worldwide to take on the 6,052-metre test of skill.
It will be a good test of golf. We've had a couple of pro-ams, so we've only had about 2 blokes who went under par figures. So it's going to be a tight course, but a very good one.
Memories of this concert will stay with the 42,000-strong audience. Never before have so many top Australian acts performed in the one show. Each gave their time for free to help the city's earthquake victims, adding an estimated $900,000 to the Lord Mayor's Appeal Fund. Today, Knights officials surveyed the aftermath, a carpet of litter covering the grounds of the International Sports Centre. Saturday night's heavy rain made the field more susceptible to damage, but Assistant Knights manager Graham Hards says a 4-day clean-up operation will see the ground ready for the Knights' first home game next month. Despite the best efforts of security staff, it's apparent alcohol was smuggled in, a conclusion reached by police yesterday as isolated skirmishes erupted.
Looks like that some may have got some alcohol in through the security guards undetected, and this is what's probably caused the problems.
But at the end of the day, any trouble proved relatively insignificant, as police, organisers and Knights officials praised the crowd's behaviour. Organisers are now working on final costings. Once done, the Lord Mayor's Appeal Fund will receive its biggest single donation yet, a gift attributed to the combined goodwill of the Australian rock industry.
If you're the kind of person who gets tired just thinking about exercise, watching Tracy Willis at work will leave you puffing. 25-year-old Tracy is one of 3 Australian aerobics champions who fly to the World Cup competition next month. But just being good is not good enough when competing internationally, and Tracy leaves little to chance, training 6 days a week with aerobics and weights and sticking to a strict high-energy diet.
How does competition aerobics compare with what you do in a gym?
It's very, very different. What you do in a gym, you're usually looking at a 45 to 50-minute class, extremely safe moves, all geared towards the person, your average class participant. Whereas in a competition, it's a performance. So you're looking at cramming everything into 2 minutes, all the best moves that you can possibly show the judges in your 2 minutes.
So if you think you'd like to get involved in competitive aerobics, see if you can keep up with this.
Official figures on attendances won't be available until tomorrow morning, but the show's theme of entertainment for the family seemed to click today. Numbers built up gradually, and even though the weather began closing in later, the crowds just seemed to keep on coming. It's reassuring for the show committee because this year's event represents a big financial investment.
We conducted some research through the community to find out what people wanted, what they came to the show to see and what they expected to see. And we made a substantial commitment in dollar terms to follow those research details along.
The best grand parade in many years preceded this afternoon's official opening. It was led by Newcastle's own Marching Koalas. The showgirl for 1990, 18-year-old Julie Meeker of Belmont North followed. Local surf club nippers, ethnic groups, colourful cyclists and veteran and vintage cars completed the outer circle, while prize-winning stock paraded on the inner grassed area. It was a grand spectacle to accompany the official opening by the Chief Executive of the St George Building Society, Jim Sweeney. In a gesture to give back something to the community which supports it so well, the Showmen's Association ended the official ceremony by donating $5,000 to the Lord Mayor's earthquake appeal. The show itself winds up tomorrow night.
For 15 years, Hastings was a regular in the eastern suburbs lineup, making a name for himself as one of Sydney's most dynamic footballers. At the end of the 1987 season, Hastings left the Roosters under stormy circumstances and took up a coaching position with the Woy Woy club, but trouble seemed to follow.
This is 3 years in a row. I got halfway through the first year. I got 5 minutes in a trial last year, and I haven't even made it to the blocks this year.
Kevin broke his arm this year, not on the football field, but a fall from his Sydney County Council truck, only 2 months after the plates from his last break were removed. Nursing the arm today at his Daly's Point home, Horry says the next 24 hours are causing just a few worries as he prepares to undergo surgery again on the arm.
I'm not so worried about the operation on my arm itself, but they have to graft a bone off my hip, and that's all new to me. So I'm not looking forward to it, but I'll be glad when it's all over anyway.
An official from the club said that Hastings was signed under an agreement of being a player coach. Considering he's broken his arm yet again, he can no longer fulfil that agreement. The club then chose to terminate his contract. The meeting that was held last night by the club decided to vote John Muggleton in as the new player coach. The former Parramatta second rower and Australia representative is hoped to bring a number of new players to the club.